All right. So welcome everybody to the Volunteer Tutor and Classroom Aide webinar series. Today we have a webinar on cross-cultural tutoring. Before we get started with that, I just wanted to let you know that next month's webinar will be on March 14. That's going to be technology tools to build your learners' digital literacy skills, and Destiny Simpson will be presenting that. And Destiny said that if you have a smartphone, it would be helpful to have it available during that session. Also, as always, I'd appreciate if you could complete the survey after you view the webinar today. That helps us with knowing what to present next, and also it's a way for you to join the mailing list if you would like. And recordings of past webinars are available on the PA Adult Ed Resources website. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers. So today's topic is cross-cultural tutoring, and we have Carol Ann Mitchell from Beyond Literacy and Maribel Ojeda from Prolo here to present. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Carol Ann's going to get us started. Carol Ann, just when you're ready, just let me know to advance the slide.
Sure, you can go to the next slide. So the topics we want to cover today, in terms of cross-cultural tutoring, we're going to start by talking about teacher disposition, and then talk a little bit about building relationships and learner partnerships with your students, and then cross-cultural intelligence and personal space. And Maribel and I are kind of bounce off each other to go through these topics. So for the teaching disposition, as a tutor, it's important that you view all learners as capable of learning. A lot of adults come to our programs with some confidence issues. That's the big thing. They've had some negative experiences with education in the past. So it's really an opportunity for you as their tutor or their instructor to help build up their confidence in themselves and view themselves as capable of learning. So you want to believe in your learner's ability to make sense of the content and find strategies to make that accessible to them, and support their development of meaningful and positive identities, so they view themselves as capable learners. Patience and flexibility are the most essential skills you can have as an instructor or a tutor. Things are going to happen, things are going to come up. Your lesson plan's not always going to go to plan, so you have to make sure you have that flexibility and that patience. And then recognizing that the teacher-learner relationship in different cultures might be different. So some students might expect you as an instructor to do most of the talking. Others might want to do a lot of talking themselves. So you have to kind of find a balance there as an instructor. So why are learning partnerships so important for cross-cultural tutoring? So this is a question we want you to take a moment to think about, and then think about what some reasons a learning partnership might be so important as a tutor or instructor in a small group or one-on-one. Why is that partnership important?
And as you think about that, keep in mind you can unmute yourself or put your answer in the chat. And if you have any questions about that technology, please feel free to let us know. So Lisa says a partnership will help the student remain motivated during difficult times because they will have buy-in. It's a great point, Lisa. So many of our students have challenges sometimes that pop up. And so it's really important for you to recognize that and take a moment to say, you know what, we're all human. We all have things pop up. Let's work through it.
If they have a partnership, they also have a friend, you're building a community, and they're more inclined maybe to open up and and become an active participant in the learner.
It's a great point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with Lynn that it becomes even more important that they have a connection to you and the community when they go through difficult challenges, but also to celebrate successes. Something that Rachel said was partnerships can help when you need to negotiate cultural differences. Absolutely. We sometimes need to bring up, some difficult conversations with our learners. And so when you have those difficult conversations, it's important to already have established a relationship so they kind of have expectations, right? And so when you have those difficult conversations and have already established a trusting relationship with you, it makes it just a little easier to get through. To know better about the new cultures. Absolutely. Absolutely. Other thoughts, Carolyn?
I know, I think that was all a lot of really good points. I think it's also a part of why this is so important, is just building a safe learning community. For a lot of students, they may not have experienced that before when they were in school. So making sure everyone is comfortable with each other and establishing that partnership rather than a top-down approach is going to make students feel more comfortable to open up. And it's kind of a perk of working with adults rather than working with children, is you can kind of get a little deeper into, the relationship building.
Great.
Where students feel safe speaking up and like helping each other out. We can probably go to the next slide. Okay, so what are some things you as tutors do, or if you're an administrator, how do you support your tutors to help build relationships with students? Think of specific activities or things that you do.
One of the things we do with our students, I'm sure everybody does, is we share the little bits of information that we got about the student during intake. For instance, do they have children? Are they working? All these connections, all these pieces of information about their lives that are part of what we build relationships on. And we ask tutors to do the same thing with them so that it's not a one-way street, but so they really are beginning to make a relationship.
That's great. I guess something I'll add to that is I'm the tutor coordinator at Beyond Literacy. So when I get a new student referred to our tutoring program, I'll do a screening with them and just ask them some questions about their learning goals and their experiences. And my final question is always like, is there anything you want your tutor to know about you? And some students don't really have much to say, but some really, they do. Like they have specific things they want us to know about them. And I share that information with the tutors to help kind of establish that relationship from the beginning. Oh, I just saw.
Carol Ann, thank you for that. That's not something we have on our forms. But I think you're right, it's a critical question. And it's really important that they know we want to know what they want to share, as well as the information we've already gathered for the state, which they may not care so much about. So thank you for that.
Of course. And Christine said, my student and I discussed how our week is going, any interesting news coming up, et cetera. So that's another good way to just kind of start the conversation during the beginning of your session, just kind of do a check-in about how things are going, anything new happening. That's great.
I'd just like to ask my students, like, what do you want to achieve What are your goals? What are you interested in? And sometimes those interests and goals really take tutoring to a different level, right? So you're able to build in literacy skill development while you're talking about the local news or their community situation. Um, you know, I often read newspapers that are local to wherever I am at the moment. And so those opportunities to engage them in conversations about what's happening to both of our community or those are really important moments to develop relationships. Christine also reads newspapers. Right. Other thoughts? How do you build relationships?
I just saw in the chat, Pat also says that they talk about themselves and daily activities and grocery shopping and stuff before beginning the work, which I think that's something that I remember doing a lot when I was tutoring as well.
I don't see Pat's chat. Maybe it was one-on-one.
No, it says to everyone.
I'm not seeing the chat. It's okay. But thank you for bringing that up. Would you let us know if there's a chat? Because I
Yeah.
don't see it.
Yeah, if it seems like you're skipping one, I'll read it out to you.
Thank you.
So these are things that everybody's kind of already mentioned, talking about hobbies or interests that you might have, talking about specific education and employment goals when you're talking to your students, and surveying students. So that's a good place to start, especially like your first meeting with a new student. You want to get to know a little bit about them and their background, why they're here, if they have specific interests, because then you might be able to bring in materials that are related to those specific interests or hobbies. And then feedback is also important. It's good to show show pride, like point out what's going well while also being like gentle and providing that little extra push to show students that you care about their learning. So some ways to start, as I noticed you were able to achieve this. I wondered about this answer here, trying to get them to think through the process, and I'm proud of your accomplishments, even if the student might not meet that ultimate goal just yet. You can still notice the small improvements that they're making and point those out to them so they can feel that sense of accomplishment. So is there some more activities to build learning partnerships? So as other people have mentioned, using local news stories, things that are relevant to your like community. Going to a physical site for tutoring in the community. So if it's possible to meet at the library or something, and be prepared to share a little bit about yourself and try to find common interest or common ground with students. Since we're all adults here, so we can talk about bills, we can talk about what's on the news, we can talk about things like that, and kind of build that relationship a little bit and build up that trust. Anybody else have any other thoughts?
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Maribel.
I was going to ask the same question. What are other people thinking about activities to build learning partnerships? Are there others that we didn't mention? Are there thoughts that you're thinking around your own tutoring students?
I saw in the chat that Mohit said something about role play, and I was curious about
Mohit, do you want to share a little bit about what you are thinking? Oh, Suma. Sorry, Suma.
Sorry.
Give Suma some time to jot that down in the chat. Are there other ideas?
I know some of my tutors ask if they can take their students to museums or the what's it called? What's Phipps Conservatory? Because they've discovered that they share some interest in something like that. And I always try to encourage that because I think that is part of building the partnership and allows them also to use language in a very real way outside of the classroom.
That's a really important point, Lisa, is like once you start building a relationship, you know, you find that you're both interested in some topic. We are not here to talk about, you know, guidelines or anything related to what you're allowed to do or not allowed to do. So Christine's question, how would you take students to the museum? So that's an internal process that you all need to address with your administrators or your tutor coordinators. And it's important to ask questions like that to the powers that be. That being said, it's incredibly important to reflect on Lisa's point about the authentic use of language. If you're an ESL teacher, I think that is a very important point. And also the contextual language around the topic. So if you're going to a science museum, really learning that discipline-specific skill or communicating about that. The appreciation of art it's great. They usually go to the museums separately and meet at the museum. Okay. Thanks for sharing that.
And you can contextualize things to your individual learners if they're having an issue at home. If they have like a letter from their child's school or something that they don't understand, you can have them bring that in and use that as a starting point. If you're working one-on-one, if you're working with a group, you might want to, you know, make something up that's similar skills being used.
That's such an important point, Caroline. Like going based on what the student needs. So if they do bring that note from the school, from their children's school, or they find something that's important to them, it's such a great point to use that as your learning material if you're doing a one-on-one. Lisa also brings up that there are museums that have virtual displays. That's a great point.
That's a great point too, yeah.
So does Museum from Washington, D.C. They actually have different, where you can pull up different aspects of the museum and you can do your lesson virtually. So if you're not able to go in person, because like us, you're too far from it, you still can bring the museum to the classroom.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's kind of cool. And it's free.
Thank you, Rachel, for putting that in the chat. Great discussion. Are we ready to get into a little activity? We're okay to move on, Caroline?
Yeah, I think so. I think we
Okay.
got a lot.
Excellent. So we have a website that we'd like you to access. If you can open up another window on your device, and try to shorten the website, tinyurl.com/jam for tutors. And when you get there, I don't know if did that work? Might have to put in HTTPS. Thank you, Rachel. Okay. What's going to happen when you do access that? I'm trying to get it to open on my screen. Give me one moment. Apologies. I have 3 monitors here, so sometimes they don't do what I want them to do. Okay. Happy Valentine's Day while we're at it. All right. So if you're there, don't do anything, don't click anything. This first slide, you can see the slides are up at the top. We're going to give you an opportunity to take a look at these scenarios. I'm going to move it over so you can see it a little bit better. And I want you to use the sticky note feature for these responses. So if you look at my screen, there's a bunch of tools on the left-hand side. Use the sticky note feature. You can pick any color you want. Type in your idea, hit save, and then hit cancel. There's your idea. You can move it around the screen. This is a great tool to use with your students if you want them to engage in an activity. So what we'd like you to do is spend some time thinking about the 2 scenarios on the screen. Building a learning partnership. If you were the student's teacher or tutor, how would you approach the first meeting? So we talked a lot about building learning partnerships. And so we'd like you to just take some time to put a few answers. Use that sticky note and we'll give you let's say 7 minutes to jot down some ideas. Okay, so I'll put a little timer on and you have 7 minutes approximately to jot down some ideas on how to address student 1 and student 2. Let me put some space in here. Ooh, lost someone. Okay, so you can add your sticky notes and your ideas.
If you can't get the sticky note to work, just put your thoughts in the chat and I'll copy them onto a note for you.
Thank you. I'm gonna have you just move over your sticky notes when you. Thank you. We have about 4 minutes left. What else? Good to. Right. All right. Got a lot of answers. Rachel, were you able to get Robin's?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. All right. Excellent. Look at all these ideas. I'll give you another. There's 3 minutes left, but I don't want to keep us longer if we still have some individuals working on that activity. Okay. About 2 minutes. While we're finishing up with that, take some time to read the ideas that your colleagues have added. Thank you, Rachel, for making it so that I could see it. I'm like, how close can I get to the screen without looking silly?
There's a lot of great ideas here. This is wonderful. I know I'm also kind of very nearsighted trying to see these.
Here, I will zoom. How do I? It's not really doing anything for me. All right. First, I'll ask if anyone wants to share their idea. Or, yeah, let's start there. Does anyone want to share what they wrote? This is a great activity to do with students who are hesitant to talk, because it gives them an opportunity to see, oh wow, I can put out my answer and make an edit before I'm ready to speak. So, and if it's not your answer, is there an answer that might seem useful to you? Christine said, one student I had previously was a truck driver. Tell us a little bit more about that truck driver. I'll just read out a few that stood out to me. And Rachel, Carol Ann, Lynn, if you see something that stood out to you, please feel free to add. I'm going to start at the top. One that I see in the middle right here, I'm going to make it larger so we can read. Focus on students' existing knowledge. Use that as a building block for new learning. Absolutely. Absolutely. What do they know now? And how can I use that to build our relationship? Great. Carol Ann, do you see anything that you find interesting?
Hold on, sorry, I just turned off my camera because my camera's been doing something weired lately. So I
That's
don't want to
okay.
be distracting. There's a lot of good stuff on here. I need to move this aside. I think for student 2, someone said try to meet in person. If that's not possible, begin with very simple technology tools and build slowly. I think that is important. It's much easier to learn the technology in person, but I know that's not always possible. So starting small and meeting in person when you can. I usually try to meet with students who might have a little bit of technology trouble. If they're going to be doing Zoom tutoring, I'll try to meet with them in person just to show them how to get in, how to do the basics, so that way they feel a little more prepared when they're before their first meeting with their tutor.
That's such an important point, right? Really getting the opportunity to meet in person is critical to their digital learning skills, but it also gives you an opportunity to read some of those cultural differences from that person, right? So you get to see them, you get to interact with them, you get to communicate in different ways when you're in person. A lot of questions around asking students about their interest. Absolutely. Absolutely. You want to know what they want to do, what they've experienced, what are they interested in? Use the internet together to develop skills and confidence. Yes, collaborating to work on a particular skill, working on it together is a great opportunity to demonstrate and watch the other person so that they can demonstrate their skill.
Maribel, the other thing I think we need to remember is, because I discovered this the hard way, that a lot of our students use their phone and a lot of technology isn't phone friendly. So if we have somebody who's like to try it out ourselves, maybe first, make sure it works there on a phone, because nothing's more frustrating for the student when they can't do it. And it's not their fault.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not their fault. Cell phones have become the #1 way that students are accessing their courses. And so it's incredibly important to make technology meaningful. Also, sometimes they're sharing a device with another family member. And so it's really important to reflect on those needs. Last minute comments around how to engage students in building a learning partnership. Excellent ideas. Thank you so much. Move that. We'll come back to the Jamboard. We talked about those two scenarios. We're going to talk a little bit about communication. When you talk across cultures, it's really important to avoid making assumptions. We don't want to assume that we understand the condition or the situation that our students are involved in. So ask questions. I think students would rather be asked than an assumption be made. So avoiding nonverbal misinterpretation. So if someone is leaning into you, maybe in one culture that means one thing, but in another culture, it might be a sign of respect and engaging in the conversation, right? So we have to be aware of physical space. Pointing. There are cultures where the middle finger is not what we typically think of as, a bad thing, right? It's rude in some cultures, but also it's just a finger in other cultures. So we want to avoid misinterpreting someone using the middle finger or other things that can be misinterpreted. We want to avoid stereotyping and preconceptions. Forget about what you know about that person or their culture. Forget about that for a moment and take time to take in the moment, right? Really engage with the person in front of you and learn from them instead of going back to what you thought you knew about that culture or person or condition. Avoid the tendency to evaluate or judge. Again, everybody's experience is their own experience, and it is not up to us to judge what other individuals go through, live like, however they behave. It's not our place to make judgments, but to learn from them and to share ideas around what that might mean for you or their situation. We want you to be aware of social norms. In some cultures, it's different than in your own culture. And people who live within a particular culture don't necessarily feel that it's strange or different or unique. It's just where they live in that culture, in that personal bubble of culture. And so when other people look in, it's hard for them to not judge. So it's important that we take a moment, slow down, educate ourselves, and say, for this person, this is natural and normal and regular. We want to use gentle humor. Don't use irony. Irony tends to be lost in as a bilingual person myself. Irony and humor are really hard to translate. So you really, when you're working cross-culturally, sometimes be aware of that, that irony is not universal. Be open-minded, embrace humility, understand that you too need to learn from the person in front of you, and they're adults. They're not students like children. They're adults and they have value. And so we want to embrace our own humility and be aware of unconscious bias. So what's cross-cultural intelligence? I'm going to read from the screen, so please forgive me for reading from the screen, but I think all of these points are really, really important. While culture is a powerful force in all of our lives, its effects are sometimes difficult to recognize because culture is invisible to its members. Culture is like water in a goldfish bowl. To the fish, it's normal and natural. It's only when you're outside the medium that you notice the difference or you notice your culture. Much of culture is below the surface. I know many times I've seen that iceberg image where there's superficial visual culture, and then there's a lot of norms that are not visual or so explicit. While some aspects of culture are visible, food, music, clothing, much of culture operates below the surface, and values, beliefs, expectations are not necessarily communicated. So we have to be aware of that. Cultures are dynamic, incredibly dynamic. Cultures can and sometimes change rapidly. Thus, cultural analysis are always aimed at a moving target, right? So we're constantly evolving. Our cultures evolve at a crazy pace. So it's important that we adjust and we continue to reflect on our own biases and how we interact with individuals. Cultures are heterogeneous. They're not uniform and different, and differences within the culture based on class, ethnicity, region, gender, etc., are sometimes profound. And so because I'm Hispanic, that does not mean my brand of Hispanic is the same brand as someone else, right? And so it's important to be aware of that. Cultures can also overlap and intersect. National cultures exert a powerful influence, but so do just generational, disciplinary, and institutional cultures. And their effects are difficult to disentangle. It's almost difficult to identify culture sometimes, right? This is our culture today, and tomorrow it might be different. So it's important to recognize that it's a web of intersecting values and norms. And individuals within cultures differ. Again, we bring different personalities, and we're intersectional. So we have cross-cultural uh, differences. And so interactions can be as varied as possible. So again, those important points around recognizing difference and allowing for time to learn about them is incredibly important. We're going to do another Jamboard. If you do not have the link, it is in the chat. Please go back to the Jamboard. And at the top, you're going to hit the arrow to go to the second set of scenarios. This is about providing feedback. And so what we'd like you to do is take a look at these students, the scenarios, and tell us who's moving it, because I moved it. Stop moving it, Rachel. I see you. It's not you? Okay, that's fine. Use the sticky note feature again on the left-hand side. And tell us a little bit about how you might provide feedback to these individuals. I'm going to give 5 minutes this time, as 7 was a little bit too much. So take 5 minutes and jot down some ideas around feedback. Oops, sorry. I'm sorry about that. Give me a second to get my screens together.
And again, if you prefer to put yours in the chat, I can put them in sticky notes for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll make space in between these. Of course, you can add multiple answers. Wow, they're coming up really quickly now. Excellent. We have about a minute left on the timer. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, as I'm looking at these responses, I like what somebody said for the second scenario, make the implicit explicit and share expectations for how everyone will complete the activity and how you want students to respond. That's a really great point. Sometimes we might think it, it seems obvious, but it's not obvious to everyone. So making that explicit is really great. And then for student 3, the first example, I'm seeing a lot of great responses, emphasizing where you've seen improvement with that particular student and acknowledging that, these tests are difficult and they don't always capture everything. It's just one test, one day, but you have seen them improve in these ways.
I also like one of the last, this one here, talk with the student about how we make progress that is not always forward moving. Give an example from my life. That's a really good point, but because again, we're humans. We want to give examples from our own experience and say, this is an example of success, and this is how I like to look at it, and gives kind of empathize and share with that student. Always stress success. Keep encouraging the students. Tests don't always reflect all that has been learned. Yes. Encourage students to speak up. I like the answer for the last one. When I say I like the answer, don't take that the wrong way. And what stood out to me here is take a step back from the material being discussed, and discuss how we do school in the US and how students experienced it before. How can the students make space? That's a really important conversation. I would like to expand upon that and say maybe we present multiple ways about schooling to the students, right? In the US, we do it this way. Tell us about your experience. As a matter of fact, center their experience, because that's what's important, right? Because you know what the US schooling looks like. You want to know their experience, right? Or their values around schooling might be completely different. So it's really important to recognize that. Is this shared learning experience? That's a really great conversation to have with students. Is this a shared experience? Talk to the students separately. Give his students examples from my experience. Absolutely. Really great responses. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to the next slide. Thank you so much for reflecting on those things. Again, thank you for those feedback. I want to talk a little bit about personal space. Take some time to look at, I don't know how big it appears on your screen, but imagine yourself at the center. On the left-hand side of the triangles is close relationship. On the right-hand side is personal acquaintance. And up at the top is strangers. So for Romania, a close relationship would stand about 1.6 feet away from me. A stranger would stand 4.6 feet away from me. And an acquaintance might be about 3.1 feet away from me. Take a look at that. I want you to take some time to really think about your students and where they come from, where they may have influences on their culture from outside cultures or countries. Think about what that looks like. Think about the differences. In a minute, I'm going to ask everyone to notice or wonder about this. Thank you, Lisa. Lisa says, I love this chart. Thanks for sharing it. It just brings it to light, right? Tell me more. How might you use this, Lisa?
Well, I'm involved with tutor training in part. The other thing this makes me think of is how when I was traveling in the Soviet Union, we American students who were traveling together would talk loudly on public transport. And most of the people who were also on public transport with us spoke much more quietly than we did. And this was just really starkly, I don't know, I can't explain how much it hit me in the face. We also, on public transport, wanted a lot more space around us than they seem to be used to, for whatever reason. But so, yeah, I mean, I think I like the fact that this is really a visual representation of something that we're kind of aware of, but it doesn't, this is really helpful.
It's hard to quantify those differences, right? It's hard to recognize them. I know in parts of Asia, you don't talk on the train. It's not expected. It is, you don't talk on your phone on the train, and you just, you take your ride. That's your quiet time. And then you go about your business outside. So it's not expected, right? And I'm from New York City. I was born in Brooklyn. So a lot of my time has been on trains, right? We talk, we see people dancing on the train, we see people doing backflips on the train, we see people living on the train. And that's a legitimate experience. And we are used to behaving in a certain way. And that's a culture. That's our culture. And so when we reflect on the personal space thing, right? If you're running for a midtown train, it really doesn't matter who you're bumping into, right? That's just a culture that's there. And we have to be aware of those differences when we facilitate learning. And ask students, where's your personal space bubble, right? Rachel?
I also thought it was interesting because earlier you had said something about different flavors of Hispanic or Latino.
Did I say
Latinx people.
flavors?
You did, or different
My brand. I didn't say flavor.
brands. Okay, brand is probably a better word.
Yeah.
But just noticing that, like, compared to the United States, Mexico in general has a bigger space bubble, and Argentina generally is smaller. So, like, not to assume things about students, based on like, oh, they're Spanish speaking, so they're all going to be like this or whatever. That it's much more sort of regional than that. Sorry about the flavor brand thing.
It's okay. I said brand, but that's okay. That's okay. No, I think you bring up a really important point, Rachel. And you're right. In certain parts of the world, personal space isn't a thing. You know, some people used to say, Americans are at arm's length, Europeans are at elbow's length, and it was a generalization I heard on a TV show. But it's important to recognize that space when you engage with a student. Also, there are some religious personal space considerations, right? If a person comes into your program and they don't shake your hand, but they put their hand on their heart or they do some other greeting that is not necessarily something you're aware of, it's really important to recognize that. And that touching is another aspect of personal space that we need to be aware of. Suma says, this really helps to know how much comfort zone there is for the student or people. Yes. Robin says, gender is a big factor too. Yes, many cultures don't touch the opposite gender or opposite genders. And so there's a big separation. Like an Orthodox Jewish person would not talk to an Orthodox Jewish male would not necessarily talk to an unmarried Orthodox Jewish female, or a Muslim female might not speak directly with a male and would prefer to work with a female. And so it's really important that we understand that these exist and that we shouldn't necessarily try to push our own agenda, but to work towards understanding. I've been talking a lot. Carol-Ann, do you have?
Sorry, my camera's still off because it was doing something really weird. I think like this is great. And yeah, being aware of personal space, and then even on an individual level, some students are going to be more close than others. So just getting used to that dynamic. I have some students who want to run up and give me a hug when I see them, and some who want to be a little bit at arm's length, and that's fine. And it's good to also have your own boundaries as far as personal space goes.
Absolutely. Christine says, good graphic. I agree. I like this one. This is a very interesting one. I hadn't found it. I just found it. So really great conversation. And overall, effective teaching involves acquiring relevant knowledge about our learners and using that information to inform our selected course materials, methods, strategies, instructional materials, and so on. So center that student or students, reflect on our own biases, use language that's appropriate, and humor, soft humor, as I called it, and or gentle humor, and you'll have a successful time, hopefully. Are there questions, comments, concerns, thoughts? Beth says, this reminds me of the various ways to say you in Spanish. Some prefer the familiar form, others I would only use the formal form. Yes, in many cultures we say tú for you as an informal, in an informal way, and we use usted for a more formal conversation. Great point.
And
This
and I
was
think
really nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
I was just sort of on top of what Beth said, like some students see the teaching or tutoring relationship as an informal one, and others might see it as more of a formal relationship. I like that analogy.
Yeah, that's a good point that we didn't really touch upon, the relationship between student and teacher. In some cultures, teachers are revered as like really important in the building of the economy and the building of the youth, and so the teacher-student relationship, it can be a formal one. In other cultures, we see it as a less formal relationship, and because we're both adults, we're talking, we're communicating on the same level. So it's really, really important to recognize where your students fit, and if you don't know, ask. Carol-Ann, any final thoughts?
I'm thinking. You can't see me thinking because my camera's doing weird stuff. Yeah, I think going back to that partnership, one of the perks of being a tutor and working either individual or like individual or small group, you get the opportunity to really build that partnership and create that space where students feel safe to kind of push themselves and push their own limits a little bit with their learning and help each other out and, you know, create a little learning community. It can be hard to do in a classroom where you have like 10 or 15 or 20 students. When you just have a small group, you can really, you know, build up that little learning community. So that's a perk of tutoring that I always try to bring up when I'm onboarding new tutors, and also adding students to the program. Like, this is going to be, you're going to get a lot of one-on-one attention. Your tutor is going to be able to like get to know you, and it's good for a lot of people. So that partnership is really important. And it really provides a lot of flexibility depending on who you're working with.
It really does. It really does. We are out of time, so I want to thank everyone for participating. And Carol Ann, thank you for your collaboration on this activity.
Yes. Thanks everyone for joining us and taking this time. This has been really great.
Thank you, everyone.